Hello and welcome to Speaking Out on Financial Abuse. Stories of survival and hope after financial abuse in a marriage or romantic partnership. I'm your host, Lori G., and today I'm happy to welcome survivor and company founder, Joy Ingram. Joy is formerly a director and facilitator with several notable DV organizations, but Joy has now gone solo and started her own resource to support those who are working as professional advocates within the domestic abuse field. Joy hopes to strengthen communication between local domestic abuse organizations and also help prevent emotional burnout within their advocate staff. Joy, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Lori. Thanks for having me.
So, where in the world are you and where are you originally from?
Right now, I live in a small community called Stanton, Virginia, in the lovely Shenandoah Valley. I'm originally from Georgia. I was raised partly in a small town called Rome, Georgia. And then later on, when I was a teenager, my parents moved to Atlanta.
So did you travel a lot? Were you a military kid?
Well, I was a military kid. I was actually born in Hawaii, but then a few years after I was born there, we moved back to Georgia. And then my dad left the military probably a couple of years after we moved back to Georgia. So I didn't travel around a lot.
So how did you end up where you live now in the Virginia area?
I ended up in Stanton because when I was 15, I was accepted into an early college entrance program in Stanton, Virginia. So I started college when I was 15, and it was here in Stanton, and I came here to go to school. And while I was here, I met a woman at church who adopted me into her family. And over the years, even when I moved back to Georgia, we stayed in touch. And in 2016, I found myself having a midlife crisis where I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. And I hated everything about Atlanta, and I called her in tears one day saying I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where to go. And she told me to come home. And so I came back to Stanton for what I thought was going to be about 3 to 6 months. And 9 years later, I'm still here.
And loving it, I guess.
I do love it.
Well, where did it start for you to become so passionate about, helping survivors and advocates, especially regarding domestic abuse? You have had such a wide range of experience. You've served as the director of community engagement for New Directions. You have served as a workshop facilitator for the RAFT organization, which you will talk about as well. And you also have ventured out on your own and started your own support resource for domestic violence victims and survivors starting over. How did you get so passionate about this? Where did that start for you?
That started with my survivorship. So I'm also a survivor of domestic violence. I'm a survivor of sexual assault. I began volunteering for Rape Crisis Center in the early 2000s after I had visited their organization and done some counseling there. Shout out to DeKalb Rape Crisis Center in Decatur, Georgia. They are now, I think, part of the Atlanta Women's Resource Center. Maybe I know they've gone through some name changes over the years, but shout out to them because they saved my life. And originally I volunteered with them for about 6 months to a year. So later on, I think about 2014, I did a stint volunteering with the Grady Rape Crisis Center in Atlanta, Georgia. And then when I moved here to Stanton, I was looking for a volunteer opportunity because, again, I thought I'd be here for a couple of months. And so I ran into New Direction Center at a festival and I asked them about volunteer and job opportunities. Not sure why I said job. So I ended up getting a job with them. I fell in love with the work, became passionate about it. I found my niche in community engagement and I just kept doing the work. Some years later, I found myself feeling a little on the burnout side and sort of going downhill, but understanding that domestic and sexual violence aren't going away anytime soon, that advocates need support so that we can continue to support survivors. And that's when I was introduced to RAFT. And I took their 5 series of workshops and I started attending their monthly advocate support calls via Zoom. And I really believed in the work that they do. And eventually a job opportunity came about with them and I was able to start working for them. So that's why I do what I do. Love and Joy came about because I'm passionate about speaking to people about domestic and sexual violence and about helping survivors and about helping advocates. I could talk about these things in my sleep all day and all night. And I just became passionate about doing public speaking and working in the community. So I wanted to find a way to do more of it on my own and just not with other organizations.
For our global audience, what does RAFT stand for?
RAFT stands for Resilience for Advocates Through Foundational Training. And we are an organization, we're a small organization of advocates that basically are supporting advocates in the anti-gender-based violence ecosystem. So we want to help advocates create more human-centered workspaces. So we know that nonprofits are a business and have to be run like a business, but we are not based on productivity, in which a lot of organizations are run like that. So we want to make it more human-centered, more survivor focused, so that advocates won't burn out. They can continue to be well and do the work to continue to support survivors.
And what does New Directions do specifically?
So New Directions Center is a direct services organization in Stanton, Virginia. They serve Stanton, Virginia, Waynesboro, Virginia, and all of Augusta County, Virginia. They serve survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking, and they serve anyone who lives and works in Stanton, Waynesboro, and Augusta County.
Were you surprised when you first became involved with volunteering and working within the field of domestic violence, how much you had to offer? What a wealth of knowledge you actually had coming from a background of being a survivor yourself.
I think I was more surprised with how much I didn't know. I came to the field of working in domestic violence as a survivor, but at the time I didn't even realize I was a survivor because he never hit me. He threatened me when the relationship ended. He put a gun to my head and threatened to kill me. There had been manipulation tactics throughout the relationship that I didn't really pay attention to. I was annoyed by a lot of things, but I didn't know enough about domestic violence to fear any of those things. I didn't know enough about domestic violence to see it as abuse. I only thought abuse was the woman with the black eye and the busted lip. And because he never hit me or pushed me down a flight of stairs or anything like that, I didn't see myself as being a person in an abusive relationship. But it wasn't until after I came to the work and started doing the work and learning about what domestic violence is that I became aware, oh, yeah, you're a survivor too.
Yeah, we think we're so unique. We are the only ones that this ever happens to. Especially with financial abuse, it's very humiliating. We don't really want to talk about that aspect of a relationship being a failure. We're actually more to go towards mentioning physical abuse than we are financial abuse.
Right. When I came to the work, I knew nothing about financial abuse as abuse. I didn't know anything about power and control and the pattern of manipulative behaviors. I didn't know anything about that.
Yeah, it's a genuine shock to find out that something that is a domestic violence issue was an everyday occurrence in your relationship. Right. And yet you know, in my case, I went through 6 marriage counselors and none said to me I was under abuse. So I must not be. But let's talk about the burnout of advocacy. You talk about how the RAFT program, the RAFT organization gets involved in providing resources and reducing burnout and career stress for advocates. What kinds of unique stresses do advocates of domestic violence face in their jobs?
One of the most unique stresses is vicarious trauma. And so in working with survivors of trauma, advocates often are negatively affected by continuing day in and day out to deal with the stress of other people's trauma. We hear their horror stories day in and day out when we go to the hospital to see about them, or when we go to court with them, or when we're doing an intake in shelter and we have to see the things that they're going through, just struggling to leave a relationship and trying to build a new life. So there's the vicarious trauma of it all that we often take in. But also, a lot of people who work as advocates in this field are also survivors. And so a lot of advocates, we did a survey in 2023, and the data from our survey showed that 61% of the people who responded to the survey as advocates were also survivors. And I've seen numbers higher in other places. First time I heard a number quoted, they said about 85% of people people who work in this field are survivors. So there's the issue of being re-triggered by dealing with other people's trauma in this field while doing the work. So there's that. There's also just the systems that we work in. The systems that we work in trying to help people are not designed to help people. The systems that we work in, our agencies are oftentimes underfunded. So the staff does not have a thriving wage. And so a lot of time you have advocates who are trying to help people and they're sitting across the table from someone telling them, you can absolutely leave this relationship and make it on your own. And at the same time, they're struggling, wondering, well, will my rent be paid on time this month? Do I have enough money to buy groceries after I pay my rent? There's also a lot of times not adequate health care available in these agencies because agencies can't necessarily afford to provide health care to their advocates. So there are a lot of things that advocates face working in this field that they may not face working in other industries.
Because it is a real trigger. I mean, I can say from my own experience, it is a real trigger. Somebody who's a survivor who becomes an advocate, you kind of have your good days and bad days, I think. And I've heard that from a lot of people who are in the domestic violence field. I am surprised the percentage is so high that there's that many survivors who go into the field at all, because I can understand how difficult it is.
I know for me, it was just a thing of initially in my survivorship, I had no one. With my sexual assault, I didn't even realize it was a sexual assault until like a year and a half after it happened, because it wasn't a stranger. It was someone I knew. And growing up, being a teenager in the 90s, rape was something that happened to adult women walking down the street at night with their groceries when a stranger jumps out of the bushes and attacks them. It wasn't something that a friend did to you, not someone that you knew. I didn't know that it happened to teenagers and young girls. So I didn't even have words to identify what had happened to me. Later, when I found the words to identify it, I still didn't have a support system. I still didn't have an advocate. So in 1999, 2000, something like that, when I went to DeKalb Rape Crisis Center and was able to get help, I really appreciated the advocates that came and helped me. And I felt like I owed it to myself and to other survivors to help them in their journey as a survivor.
Yeah, the identification, to be brave enough as a survivor to not just go public about your story, about your own recovery, but to also keep sharing that story over and over again when you have new victims coming through the door so they don't feel alone. And I do think it takes a brave individual to do that and to do it consistently day after day. How many years have you been involved in helping survivors of domestic abuse?
So right after I went to DeKalb Rape Crisis Center, and I want to say early 2000, right after I finished my counseling or so with them, I volunteered on their hotline for, I want to say about 6 months to a year. Later, I took a break from that. And then in 2014, I volunteered on the hotline for the Grady Rape Crisis Center, which is a hospital in Atlanta. And then after that, when I moved to Stanton, that's when I started working for New Directions Center in 2016. And I've been doing advocacy work ever since.
And tell us more about what New Directions does. I know it's a gender-based violence advocacy organization that helps empower as well advocates to live balanced, supported lives.
Yes. So New Direction Center offers an array of services to survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking. They provide all of their services absolutely free and confidential to their clients. They provide a 24-hour hotline for folks to call. You can call if you're going through it now. If you went through it 20 years ago and you've got questions, you can give them a call. They have an emergency shelter for people who are fleeing violence and have nowhere else to go. They offer hospital accompaniment. So when people have been sexually assaulted or violently abused and they need to go to the hospital for a forensic exam, an advocate will come out to the hospital with them. They offer court advocacy so that when folks need to go to get a protective order or they have to sit in court and face their abuser. We also have counselors so that when folks need to come in and see someone and talk to someone about the abuse that they've suffered, there are counselors on staff for that. We have an adult counselor as well as a counselor for youth, because we know that witnessing domestic violence in the home can be traumatic as well.
It sounds like both these organizations, New Directions and RAFT, are trying to meet it at both ends, on the survivor end for New Directions and then also on helping advocates stay. And I'm wondering what the burnout rate is for advocates, how long they average last in that business.
numbers that say that advocates on average last about 2 years.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So we're working to make the numbers a lot larger. We're trying to help agencies retain their advocates because it puts a strain on an agency as well, not only just having to going through advocates and having to introduce clients to new counselors and new advocates, but also just on having to hire people. Hiring new people is expensive and it takes time out of your day, and it's time that you could be dedicating to supporting survivors and helping your clients.
Well, and they have to have credentials too. So you can only be interviewing certain clients for these positions. They have to have an education for this.
Yeah, you do have to have a certain amount of education for most positions in these agencies. Some of them not so much, but even still, just finding the right person who's the right fit, who wants to learn, who's trauma informed and wants to be trauma informed, who isn't just coming and looking for a paycheck for the next 2 to 3 months. Just trying to weed those folks out is difficult and it's time consuming.
Well, and you brought up a good point about wages, that people who are working as advocates in that field to be able to supply a living wage to people so that they can even pay the most moderate of rent. And if you live in an area where you have to have a car on top of that, right, and you may have to commute to that job, I mean, you have to add all these expenses in. And if it's not going to be able to pay your bills, if you're going to make more money waitressing,
absolutely,
then it's I can see why advocates would maybe burn out financially, as for sure, after a few years if it's not well funded. But you have actually branched out quite a bit yourself personally. You have started something that you call Love and Joy. And this is your personal passion, aside from actually all this commitment and all this dedication you definitely have for other organizations. Tell us more about this Love and Joy.
So Love and Joy is a business that I started. I sort of started it around the pandemic time, but we do a few different things. So there's going to be consulting with agencies like a New Direction Center and with the state coalitions on how they can improve things for their advocates and possibly for their clients as well. Because a lot of times one of the things I've been blessed to be able to do is to travel around to different agencies and different conferences and learn how different agencies do things. And so one of the things that I found is that agency A may be having a problem that they haven't figured out yet, but agency F may have found the solution to that problem and have worked through it. But agency A doesn't know that because they're not communicating. So when I can collect information and share it with other organizations, that's really helpful to them. Another thing that I'll be doing is workshop facilitations, similar to the ones that I do with RAFT, but just on different topics that different agencies may be interested in. So for instance, I've done self-care workshops with different agencies. I recently did one on cultural humility and trauma-informed care. I've done workshops on sexuality and healthy sexuality. So just different information, taking it to different organizations to provide them with information to help their advocates and to help the survivors that they serve.
Do you find nonprofit organizations that you work with they're just very self-involved, and that's why they need a liaison like you, because everyone's kind of scrambling for funding, scrambling to get their programs out, scrambling to hire? Is that kind of the issue as to why everybody's kind of an island? Do you feel people are an island out there?
I do feel like folks are an island out there. And it's hard to stretch out and collaborate with other folks because it's hard for them to find the time. When you've got 10 people and they're trying to do the job of 20 people, 25, 30 people, it's hard to branch out for other things. And they can only see what they feel is most important and not necessarily things that surround those that may provide them with other resources. So my job in this is to look around and find the other resources and to go to the folks and say, hey, what is it that you need? And let me help you link up with these things because I know that you don't have the time to go out and search for them.
Well, I could see developing workshops would be a really big part of that, because that is such a universal thing or universal idea, because the workshop you can take to several different types of organizations and be able to deliver information. And you mentioned doing self-care, and you mentioned one example. What other kinds of self-care type workshops have you developed or are you developing now?
First workshop I did on self-care, I did in 2017. And it was interesting because I was a new advocate then. I just come back from a training. It was a 2.5-day training all about trauma. And when I finished, I was traumatized. It was so much so that when I went to work a few days after the conference, my executive director asked me how I was doing. And, usually I would be like, oh, I'm great, I'm wonderful, blah, 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 even when I wasn't. But that day I was just like, I'm not well. And so she sort of introduced me to the concept of self-care, and I started researching it. And then our state coalition was putting on a conference later that year and put out a call for workshop proposals. And I said, maybe I could do something on self-care. And I know it was a hit because it was a small conference of maybe 200 to 300 advocates, and 60 people showed up for my workshop on self-care. And that just let me know that advocates needed self-care. We needed to understand what it is. We needed to understand that it was okay to take care of ourselves and to motivate ourselves to take better care of ourselves. So that was basically an introductory workshop to the concept of self-care and talking about what we needed to do and why it was important.
It's just such a daily stress of a job. What is your plans for, let's say, the next 12 months? What do you see?
Next 12 months are going to be to do more curriculum development and more marketing just to different agencies to let them know that I'm here and let folks know these are the things that I do and to talk to them and see what their needs are.
Are you going to offer your workshops globally?
Yes, they will be offered online because Zoom is a beautiful thing. And especially when I think about, a lot of nonprofits can't afford to send their advocates to travel. A lot of nonprofits can't necessarily afford to pay for my travel. So, with the Zoom, I travel to the kitchen table or to my desk or somewhere in my house. I pour myself a cup of coffee and we can start talking about all the things.
Yeah, I would think that'd be very much in demand as doing these live webinars, live chats. Well, I want to ask you a couple questions that I ask all guests. What is your tip for someone listening right now who is under domestic abuse but is afraid to take that first step?
For someone who is living in an abusive relationship and afraid to take that first step, I would say have faith and put your faith in front of your fear. Because fear says, what if I fail? And faith says, watch me excel. And you just have to have faith that you can get out of the situation and that you can move forward in your life and to do better. Have faith in yourself and put it in your mind that you're going to get through it and you can get out of it and you can live a better life because you deserve better.
And know that there's resources.
There's absolutely resources out there. Call the National Domestic Violence Hotline. They can link you up with resources in your community, but there are definitely resources out there. Like I said, when I was going through domestic violence, I didn't know it was domestic violence, so I didn't know to reach out. And that's the thing. If you're in a situation and you're confused, if you have questions, if you're not even sure, call a domestic violence hotline. They can help.
And just knowing that, again, that those resources are out there, it makes a really big difference because financial abuse is very hard to pinpoint as a domestic violence issue, which is what this show is about, is making sure people do know that there are resources out there that can definitely help you.
Yeah, and a lot of the resources are free. That's the thing a lot of people don't understand. A lot of the resources are free. So like New Directions Center, everything is free and confidential. You don't have to provide an insurance card. We don't typically ask for IDs for services and things because we know that people can use certain information to find you. So we want to make sure that everything is accessible to folks and that it's safe for them as well.
What do you think is the most common reason from your experience victims who are under domestic violence don't want to seek help?
A lot of it is guilt and shame. A lot of times they feel like it's their fault. Sometimes they don't want their family to fall apart. They feel like if they seek help and they try and leave, then they're the cause of the breakdown in the family. They don't see the abuse as the cause of the breakdown in the family. And so they feel like they're the issue, they're the problem. And if they just fix themselves, it will get better.
Yeah, it sounds like they talk themselves out of it. There's too many other downsides. What is your tip now for someone newly out of a domestic abuse situation, but is not sure what to do next to start to recover?
I would say just put it in your mind that you're going to keep moving forward. I know sometimes it's hard and you want to go back to the old things because the devil you know is more comfortable than the devil that you don't know. And it can be hard. Doing anything new can be hard. But when I think about doing new things and doing hard things and moving forward, I think of a quote from Stacey Abrams. And it's a quote that I heard in her TED Talk after she lost the governor's race for Georgia. And she says, I'm going to move forward because going back isn't an option and standing still is not enough. And so that's what I tell myself when things get hard. It's like, I got to move forward. And I just keep moving forward. Keep your eye on the prize. Know that you deserve better. Know that you deserve to be treated well. Love yourself and keep moving forward.
That's so great. It really is great advice. Joy, I want to give you an open invitation because I really want to have you back on the show to hear your story, because someone like you becomes this passionate about helping survivors of domestic abuse. I think just having the empathy in general for humanity that you have, it often does come from a place where tragic circumstances could go either direction. And it's really, really been an honor to have you on the show today. And I really do hope you come back.
Thank you so much, Lori. It's been a pleasure to be on your show today, and I will definitely come back.
And you've been listening to Joy Ingram. She is the CEO and founder of Love and Joy. I'm going to put all the links below. She is also formerly with New Directions and RAFT, and I will put their links below as well. And thank you again for being on the show. And you've been listening to Speaking Out on Financial Abuse.